Nobody showed up to my graduation, not a single familiar face in the entire crowded stadium. The row reserved for my family stayed completely empty, just a line of cold metal seats glaring back at me under the bright stadium lights. I had mailed the tickets months ago. I had sent reminders. I had even bought them a parking pass. But as I stood there in my heavy navy gown, sweating from nerves and the heat, the only thing sitting in those seats was my own disappointment. It felt like a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe while everyone around me cheered and waved at their parents in the stands. When the dean's voice boomed over the speakers, echoing, "Cheryl Drummond, summa cum laude," I instinctively looked up. It was a reflex, a stupid habit I hadn't broken yet. I scanned the front row, hoping to see my mom's red coat or my dad's baseball cap. I just wanted 1 second of eye contact, one thumbs up. Instead, I saw a stranger's dad checking his watch and a mom adjusting her daughter's sash. I forced the biggest, fakest smile I could manage for the camera, shaking the dean's hand while my heart shattered quietly inside my chest. I held that diploma tight, not because I was proud, but because it was the only thing holding me up. I walked off the stage and immediately felt the isolation hit me. Around me, the air was filled with laughter that sounded like confetti exploding. Friends were crying into bouquets of roses. Dads were hugging their sons. I stood awkwardly by a trash can, scrolling through my phone just to look busy, pretending I had unread messages. My friend Sarah ran up to me, squealing, and asked the question I was dreading. "Cheryl, you did it! Where is your family? We need a group photo." The lie rolled off my tongue so easily, practiced from years of covering for them. "Oh, they're stuck in traffic," I said. "They'll meet me at dinner." I knew they weren't in traffic. I knew exactly where they were. They were at home, probably helping my younger brother Ryan pick out a tie for his date or fixing him a snack. Ryan was 22, perfectly capable, but to them, he was the sun and the moon. I was just the satellite that paid the bills. By the time I reached the parking lot, the sky was turning a beautiful gold, but everything felt gray to me. I sat in my beat-up Honda Civic, the one I bought with money from double shifts at the diner, and watched the happy families drive away. Balloons floated above car roofs. Horns honked in celebration, and I sat in silence, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I bet you think this is just a sad story about a girl whose parents didn't show up. You're wrong. This isn't a sob story, this is a revenge story. Because what happened next wasn't just neglect, it was a crime. If you stick around until the end, I promise you'll see exactly how I made them regret every single empty seat. I didn't just get mad, I got even. And trust me, you need to see what I found in my credit report later that changed everything. The truth is, I shouldn't have been surprised they ghosted me. My parents had skipped my high school graduation, too. Back then, Mom said Ryan had a stomach ache. Dad didn't even bother to call. It was always something. Always a smaller, shinier priority than me. I had spent my entire teenage life trying to earn their love like it was a scholarship I had to qualify for. I worked 2 jobs while in college, sending money home whenever they asked, thinking that if I just gave enough, they would finally see me. I thought love sounded like thank you, but I learned the hard way that for my family, love just sounded like, give me more. 3 days passed. I sat in my apartment, the silence ringing in my ears. My graduation cap and gown were still hanging by the door, a reminder of the day that was supposed to be mine. I hadn't heard a peep from them. No congratulations, no sorry we missed it, no how was the ceremony? Nothing. I was starting to think maybe they were actually sick, or maybe something terrible had happened. I was worried. I was stupid. Because then, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text from Mom. My heart jumped, hoping for an apology. I picked up the phone, my hands trembling slightly. I unlocked the screen and the message popped up. It wasn't an apology. It was a demand. Need $3,000 for Ryan's car down payment. Transfer it by tonight. That was it. No hello. No congrats on the degree I spent 4 years sweating blood for. Just a dollar sign and a deadline. The number stared at me like a command. They didn't want a daughter. They wanted an ATM. They wanted the steady paycheck disguised as a child. They missed the biggest day of my life, and their first communication afterward was a bill for my brother's luxury. Hit subscribe if you think respect is a two-way street. Only toxic people, like the parents who raised me, think they own you just because they gave birth to you. Don't let people use you to fund their favorites. Subscribe if you stand for boundaries and protecting your peace. And if you think parents should actually show up for their kids instead of just showing up for their wallets, comment, "I believe in showing up." Don't side with the people who hide the truth. I stared at that text for so long the screen dimmed and turned black. Something inside me, something small and tired that I had ignored for years, finally stood up. I looked at my banking app. I had the money. I had saved it for my own apartment deposit. I could send it. I could be the good daughter one more time. But then I remembered the empty metal seats. I remembered the lie I told Sarah. I remembered the silence in my car. I felt something in my chest harden like concrete setting. I wasn't going to cry anymore. I typed in a number, but it wasn't $3,000. I typed in $1. And then I added a 2-word note, "Happy graduation." I hit send. I watched the bubble turn blue, and I knew I had just started a war. Sending that single dollar felt like jumping off a cliff. My finger hovered over the screen for a second, shaking before I let it go. As soon as the notification said delivered, the silence in my apartment got heavier. It wasn't a peaceful quiet, it was the scary kind of quiet, like the deep breath before a giant storm hits your house. I stared at the wall, waiting for my phone to blow up, waiting for the screaming phone calls. But while I waited, my brain started playing a movie of my life. It showed me all the clues I had missed. I finally saw that this didn't start with a missed graduation. This started the day I was old enough to open a wallet. But here is the thing that kept nagging at me. Why did they need exactly $3,000 so fast? Mom said it was for a car down payment for Ryan, but something about that didn't smell right. Ryan had told me last week he was in between jobs, so how could he afford monthly car payments? There is a dirty secret hidden in that $3,000 number, and when I found out what it really was later, it made me sick to my stomach. But right then, I was just thinking about how different Ryan's life was from mine. You see, in the Drummond house, there were 2 types of kids. There was Ryan, the golden child, and then there was me, the ATM machine. It wasn't obvious at first. It was small things. Ryan got the brand new sneakers with the cool lights in the heels because boys play rough. I got the generic brand from the discount bin because you need to be practical. When Ryan got a C on his report card, they hired a tutor and bought him ice cream to cheer him up. When I got an A, they just nodded and asked if I could babysit so they could take Ryan to the movies. It was always a reason, always a smaller, shinier priority than me. When I turned 16, things changed fast. I didn't get a car or a party. I got a work permit. I remember waking up at 4 a.m. every single weekend. The sky was pitch black. While Ryan was sleeping warm and cozy in his bed, I was tying on a brown Starbucks apron that smelled like old milk. I spent my mornings burning my fingers on hot steam wands, serving caramel macchiatos to grumpy lawyers and tired nurses. I came home smelling like coffee beans and exhaustion, counting my tips in the car. I was so proud of that money. I thought it was mine. I was so wrong. Every time I got paid, the texts would start coming in from Mom. They were never mean. They were sweet, which was worse. She would say, "Oh, honey, you are such a hard worker. By the way, Ryan needs piano lessons this month and things are tight." Or she would say, "He has a field trip. Just need a little extra help." And I would say, "Okay." I always said, "Okay." The first time she told me, "You are our pride," I believed her. I thought her love sounded like appreciation. I thought if I gave them the money, I was buying my spot in the family. I didn't know that to them. Love just sounded like obligation. I spent years trying to earn love like it was a scholarship I had to win. But looking back, I realized something strange. Mom never asked Ryan to work. Not once. Even when he turned 18, she said he needed to focus on his dreams. His dream was mostly playing video games in the basement. But my dream? My dream was to buy their approval. I was literally paying for my own parents' attention, and the price kept going up every year. But hold on, because the way they reacted to my $1 tip was about to show me just how little I actually meant to them. When I got into grad school, I thought everything would change. I told myself that this degree, this Master of Data Analytics, was the magic key. I thought if I achieved something huge, something Ryan had never done, they would finally see me. I thought maybe Mom would stop seeing me as the backup plan. I wanted her to stop seeing me as a steady paycheck disguised as a daughter. I wanted to be seen as her equal. I studied until my eyes burned. I ate instant noodles to save money. I didn't ask them for a dime. In fact, I still sent them money from my student loans when they cried about emergencies. But sitting there on my couch, 3 days after they ghosted my ceremony, the truth hit me hard. It felt like a slap in the face. They didn't miss my graduation because they were busy. They missed it because they didn't care. And worse, my success didn't make them proud. It just made them greedy. They saw my new degree and didn't see a majestic achievement. They saw a salary bump. They saw a bigger bank account they could tap into. That text asking for $3,000 proved it. They waited 3 days, not to let me celebrate, but to calculate how much they could ask for. This is the part where most people would just cry and send the money anyway. We are trained to help family, right? Family helps family. That's what Mom always said. But that phrase is a trap. It's a lie designed to keep you in chains. And I was about to break those chains with a hammer. You won't believe what I did next with the spare key my mother insisted on keeping. It was the pettiest, most satisfying thing I have ever done. I looked at the $3,000 demand again. It wasn't a request. It was a number and a deadline. No curiosity about my life. No, how are you? Just give us this. I realized I had run out of reasons to keep buying affection that never existed. I was done. I looked at my savings account. I had barely $3,000 to my name. If I sent that money, I wouldn't be able to pay my own rent. I would be eating rice for a month while Ryan drove a new car. The unfairness of it made my blood boil hot. The silence in the room was broken by the sound of my own breathing. I was terrified, but I was also furious. I realized that for years, money was the only language my family spoke. Well, I just changed the language. I sent that one single dollar. And then I stood up. I walked over to the drawer by the front door. I pulled out the spare key, the one Mom made me give her just in case of emergencies. She used that key to barge in whenever she wanted, to check up on me, to remind me she was in charge. I walked to the kitchen trash can. I held the key over the garbage. It felt heavy, like it weighed 100 pounds. Dropping it meant I was officially alone. It meant no one was coming to save me. But it also meant no one could steal from me anymore. I let go. The key hit the bottom of the empty bin with a loud clank. It was the best sound I had ever heard, but I knew throwing away the key wasn't enough. As long as that lock was the same, she could still get in. She probably had a copy. I grabbed my phone again, but not to call her. I searched for a local locksmith. I thought changing the locks would be the end of it. I thought I would get some peace. I was so naive. I had no idea that by locking them out, I was actually inviting the police in. You heard me right, the police. Because when a narcissist loses control over you, they don't just walk away. They try to destroy you. And my mother was about to pull a stunt so crazy it would make the neighbors talk for years. I called the locksmith at 8:00 p.m. on a Tuesday. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird while I waited for him to answer. Every time I heard a car drive by outside, I jumped. Terrified it was my mother coming to demand an explanation for the $1. I paced back and forth in my tiny living room, checking the window through the blinds. I felt like a criminal in my own home, but I wasn't the criminal. I was just a girl trying to feel safe for the first time in her life. When the locksmith finally said he was on his way, I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I sat on the floor by the door, guarding it just in case she had a key, and decided to barge in right then. The wait for the locksmith felt like hours, even though it was only 30 minutes. I kept imagining the door handle turning. I kept imagining her face, that look of disappointment mixed with anger that she mastered years ago. I was scared, yes, but I was also excited. I was about to do something permanent, something that couldn't be undone with a sorry or a bank transfer. But I had no clue that this lock was going to trigger a chain reaction that would bring men with guns to my doorstep. The locksmith was an older man with a kind, wrinkled face and a soft voice. He didn't ask why a young woman was changing her locks late at night. He just nodded like he understood secrets. He knelt down and laid out his tools on a small cloth. They clinked together softly, sounding like wind chimes. I watched him work, mesmerized. He unscrewed the old lock, the one my mother had the key to, and pulled it out of the wood. It left a gaping, empty hole in the door. Looking at that hole, I felt a strange sadness. That lock had been there since I moved in. It was the barrier between me and the world, but it was a broken barrier because the people who hurt me most had the passcode. When he slid the new lock into place, it was shiny and silver. It looked strong. He tightened the screws with a satisfying kurr-kurr sound. It felt like he was screwing courage directly into my spine. He handed me the new keys. They were cold and heavy in my palm. "There you go, miss," he said gently. "Nobody gets in unless you want them to." I almost cried. I paid him, and as he walked away, I closed the door. I turned the deadbolt. Click. That sound, that sharp, solid click, was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. It was the sound of a boundary. I stood there for 10 minutes just locking and unlocking the door. Click, click, click. Each time, I felt a little stronger. For 24 years, my boundaries were just suggestions. My no was always turned into a yes if I felt guilty enough. But this lock didn't care about guilt. It didn't care about family obligation. It only obeyed the key in my hand. But as I stared at the metal, a cold thought crept into my mind. My parents weren't going to stop just because of a piece of metal. In fact, this was only going to make them try harder. That night, the silence in my apartment felt different. Usually the quiet made me lonely. It reminded me that I wasn't invited to parties or family dinners. But tonight, the silence felt rich. It felt like a warm blanket. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. I wasn't waiting for a text. I wasn't waiting for a demand. I was just existing. For the first time, I realized that peace wasn't just the absence of noise. Peace was the absence of fear. I slept that night without waking up once, the new key sitting on my nightstand like a guardian angel made of brass. The next morning, sunlight flooded my apartment. It hit the floorboards and made dust motes dance in the air. I brewed coffee and watched the steam curl up from the mug. I felt light. I felt free. I thought, this is it. This is my new life. I started planning my day. I would apply for jobs. I would go for a walk. I would be a normal person who doesn't dread her phone ringing. I was so happy in that moment. I was so foolishly happy. I didn't know that my mother had already realized I wasn't answering. I didn't know she had already tried her key, realized it didn't work, and was currently escalating her tactics from manipulative to insane. If you think toxic parents just give up when you shut them out, you are wrong. They don't see a locked door as a boundary. They see it as a challenge. They see it as a malfunction in their property. And when their property stops working, they don't fix it. They call the authorities. I was sipping my coffee, smiling at the wall when the first knock came. It wasn't a friendly tap. It was a heavy, authoritative pound that shook the picture frames. Bam, 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 the sound echoed through my small apartment like a gunshot. I froze. My coffee cup stopped halfway to my mouth. My first thought was, it's her. My stomach dropped to my shoes. I thought she had come over to scream at me for the $1 text. I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing, hoping she would think I wasn't home. I stared at the door, willing it to hold. Bam, bam, bam. "Miss Drummond?" a deep voice shouted. "Open the door." That wasn't my mother's voice. It was a man's voice. Deep, serious, commanding. Panic spiked in my chest. Was it the landlord? No, Mrs. Higgins always called first, and she was a sweet old lady who whispered. This sounded like trouble. I crept toward the door on my tiptoes, my heart racing so fast I could hear it in my ears. I leaned in and looked through the tiny peephole. The hallway was distorted by the glass, but I could see clearly enough. It wasn't my mother, it wasn't my dad. It was two uniforms, dark blue, badges shining under the hallway lights. Police. My blood ran cold. Police. At my door? I hadn't done anything. I was a data analyst. I paid my taxes. I had never even gotten a speeding ticket. Why were there two officers standing outside my apartment, looking ready to break down my door? I didn't know it yet, but my mother hadn't just called them for a chat. She had told them a lie so dangerous it could have gotten me thrown in a psych ward. She had pulled the welfare check card. I opened the door slowly, my hands shaking. The taller officer, a black man with a stern face but kind eyes, looked down at me. He had his hand resting near his belt. "Are you Cheryl Drummond?" he asked. "Yes," I squeaked, my voice sounding tiny. "Is everything okay?" He looked me up and down, checking for injuries, checking for madness. "We received a call from your mother, Linda Drummond," he said, his voice calm but professional. "She stated that you have been acting erratically. She said you changed your locks. You aren't answering calls, and she believes you might be a danger to yourself." The world tilted on its axis. Danger to myself? Because I didn't send her $3,000? Because I wanted privacy? I almost laughed. It wasn't a funny laugh. It was a hysterical, terrified sound. She had weaponized the police. She used the law to force me to talk to her. She used resources meant for dying people to check on her disobedient daughter. I looked at the officer, fury rising up in my throat like bile. "I'm not unstable," I said, my voice gaining a little strength. "I'm just broke and tired of them using me." The officer's face softened just a fraction. "Mind if we come in and talk, Miss Drummond?" I stepped back and let them in. I had nothing to hide. My apartment was spotless. My diploma was on the wall. But as they walked into my sanctuary, I realized the war had officially begun. My mother had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She wanted to embarrass me. She wanted to scare me into submission. Fine. But she forgot one thing. I was the one with the evidence now. And what I was about to find on my credit report would make this police visit look like a tea party. I stepped back and held the door open, my hand gripping the cool metal handle so hard my knuckles turned white. Watching two uniformed police officers walk into my tiny, safe apartment felt like a physical violation. This was my sanctuary. This was the one place in the world where I didn't have to pretend to be happy. And now, the muddy boots of the Denver police were tracking dirt onto my rug because my mother decided to throw a tantrum. The taller officer walked in first, his eyes scanning the room like he was looking for a bomb or a dead body. I stood against the wall, feeling small and humiliated, wondering if my neighbors were watching through their peepholes, wondering if I looked like the crazy daughter my mother described. The officer turned to me, his face serious. "Ma'am, we just need to ask a few questions," he said, his voice deep and rumbling in the small room. "Your mother said you were making threats? That you weren't making sense on the phone?" I felt my face get hot. Threats? The only thing I threatened was her control over my wallet. "I haven't spoken to her in 3 days," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though it wobbled a little. "I didn't threaten anyone. I just stopped sending her money." The officer wrote something down in his small notebook. The scratching sound of his pen felt incredibly loud in the quiet room. It felt like he was writing down my dignity. But as he looked around, I saw his expression change. He was expecting a disaster zone. He was expecting dirty dishes, holes in the wall, or maybe a girl crying in the corner. Instead, he saw my reality. And the difference between what my mother told him and what was right in front of his eyes was about to make this conversation take a very sharp turn. You won't believe what the officer noticed that made him realize who the real villain in this story was. I took a deep breath and pointed around the room. "Look around, officer," I said, gaining a little more confidence. "Does this look like the home of someone who is losing her mind?" The apartment was spotless. My coffee mug was sitting on a coaster, my laptop was open to a spreadsheet for my job search, and there, hanging proudly on the wall, was my framed diploma, Master of Data Analytics. It was perfectly straight. "I just finished grad school," I told him. "I am applying for jobs. I have no medical issues. I just have boundaries." The officer stopped writing. He looked at the diploma, then back at me. The tension in his shoulders dropped. He closed his notebook with a snap. A small, almost sad smile touched his lips. "Not even close, ma'am," he said softly. "You seem perfectly fine to me." The younger officer by the door nodded in agreement. The air in the room shifted instantly. They weren't intruders anymore. They were just two guys who had been tricked by a manipulative woman. "We will file the report as no concern," the taller officer said. "If she calls again, you can tell us to reference this visit number." He handed me a card. I took it, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. But underneath the relief, the anger was starting to boil. She had wasted their time and scared me half to death, all because she couldn't handle the word no. As they turned to leave, the older officer paused with his hand on the doorknob. He looked back at me, and his eyes were kind but full of a heavy warning. What he said next wasn't police procedure. It was life advice. And it was a warning that I should have taken much more seriously because he was predicting the future. "Ms. Drummond," he said quietly, leaning in slightly, "sometimes when people start finally standing up for themselves, the people around them panic. It happens more than you would think." He gave me a knowing nod, like he had seen this exact scene 100 times before. "Stay safe." Then he opened the door and walked out. The heavy click of the lock sliding back into place signaled the end of the visit. I stood in the hallway staring at the wood grain of the door. His words echoed in my head. Others panic. My mother wasn't just mad, she was panicking. She was losing her grip on me, and she was flailing around trying to grab whatever she could to pull me back down. When the adrenaline faded, the shaking started. I leaned my back against the door and slid down until I was sitting on the floor, hugging my knees. I wasn't shaking from fear anymore. I was shaking from pure fury. I realized then that my mother hadn't just crossed a line. She had declared war. Calling the police wasn't a checkup. It was a power move. She wanted to humiliate me. She wanted me to be scared enough to call her back, crying and apologizing. She wanted to break my new lock with a battering ram of guilt. But sitting there on my floor, I didn't feel like apologizing. I felt like fighting. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my couch in the dark, the police report number sitting on the coffee table like a weapon I didn't want to use. I replayed my entire childhood in my head. I thought about every time she guilted me into sending cash. I thought about how she used the phrase, "family helps family," like a magical spell to empty my bank account. It had always been about control, never about care. If she was willing to send armed officers to my house just to prove a point, there was no limit to what she would do next. The silence in my apartment didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt heavy. It felt like the creepy, breathless pause right before a tornado touches down. I had no idea that while I was sitting there, worrying about police and phone calls, the real attack was already happening. It wasn't happening at my front door. It was happening silently, invisibly, in a computer system miles away. The silence from my parents over the next 12 hours wasn't a retreat. It was a strategy. And when I woke up the next morning, I was about to find out exactly what that strategy cost. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. The city was still gray and quiet under a soft haze. My phone was lying face down on the table, exactly where I left it. I picked it up and checked the screen. Nothing. No texts from Mom. No missed calls from Dad. No angry messages from Ryan. The silence was deafening. I hadn't heard from my mother since the minute she sent the cops to my door. A normal mother would have called to ask, "Are you okay? Did the police come?" But she didn't. Her silence wasn't peace. It was a trap. It was the quiet of a predator, waiting in the grass. I made coffee, my hands moving automatically, but my mind was racing. I opened my laptop, telling myself I was going to apply for jobs. I needed to focus on my future. But a pit formed in my stomach, a cold, hard knot of intuition that told me something was wrong. I couldn't focus on my resume. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, and instead of opening LinkedIn, I opened my banking app. I don't know why. Maybe it was the officer's warning. Maybe it was just instinct. But as the screen loaded, the blue circle spinning round and round, I felt sick. The app opened. My checking account looked normal. My savings account was still there. I let out a breath. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe the police visit was the grand finale. But then, I clicked on the tab that said, Credit Score and Report. The page refreshed, and my heart stopped beating. 2 bright red notifications were blinking at me, 2 new inquiries, 2 names I didn't recognize, and a balance that was already climbing into the thousands. 2 names blinked back at me from the computer screen, glowing in bright, angry red letters, Capital One and Discover. My breath hitched in my throat, making a sharp, squeaking sound in the quiet morning. These weren't my cards. I hadn't applied for anything. I had been sitting in my apartment crying and changing locks, not shopping for credit. But there they were. 2 brand new accounts opened just last week. My eyes scanned the details, desperate to find a mistake. I saw my social security number. I saw my full legal name. But then I saw the address. It wasn't my apartment in Denver. It was the house in Littleton, my parents' house. I stared at the screen, my brain trying to reject what my eyes were seeing. Identity theft is something that happens to other people. It happens when you lose your wallet or click a bad link. It doesn't happen because your mother gets mad at you. But as I clicked on the transaction history, the pieces of the puzzle slammed together. You won't believe what they were buying. It wasn't groceries. It wasn't emergency medicine. It was a shopping list for a celebration I wasn't invited to. I clicked on the Recent Transactions tab, and the list of charges scrolled down the screen like a receipt from hell. Cherry Creek Events, $1,200. Denver DJ Agency, $600. Glam Studio, $300. My stomach turned over. These weren't random purchases. This was a party, a big, expensive, flashy party. And then it hit me. Ryan's birthday was coming up. They were throwing him a massive bash, a Sweet 16-style blowout for my golden child brother, and they were paying for every single balloon and cupcake with credit cards opened in my name. The text message from 3 days ago suddenly rushed back into my head like a gunshot. Need $3,000 for Ryan. I had thought it was just a greedy demand for cash. I was wrong. It wasn't a request. It was a budget. When I said no, they didn't just give up on the party. They just decided that I was going to pay for it whether I agreed to or not. They took my refusal, crumpled it up, and stole my identity instead. They were dancing, drinking, and celebrating Ryan's life using debt that would ruin my life. This is the moment where I should have cried. I should have curled up in a ball. But I didn't. The sadness evaporated, and something cold and hard took its place. They thought I was weak. They thought I would never find out or that I would be too scared to do anything about it. They were wrong. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number on the back of the digital statement. My hands were shaking, but my voice was about to be the steady sound of justice. "Thank you for calling Capital One," the automated voice chirped. I pressed 0 again and again until a real person picked up. "This is Cheryl Drummond," I said, my voice sounding strange and robotic to my own ears. "I need to report identity theft." The woman on the line, her name was Sarah, paused. I could hear her typing furiously in the background. "Okay, Ms. Drummond, let me pull up your file. Can you verify your address?" I gave her my real address. "That's not what we have on file," she said slowly. "We have an address in Littleton." "That is not my home," I said, gripping the edge of my desk so hard my fingers hurt. "I did not open this account. I did not authorize these charges." The typing stopped. The silence on the line stretched out, thick and heavy. "Ma'am," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a serious, professional whisper, "I see here that this account was opened in person at our Littleton branch last month." She hesitated, like she didn't want to say the next part. "There is a co-applicant listed on the application." I knew the answer before she said it. I could feel it in my bones, but hearing it out loud was like taking a knife to the heart. It confirmed that my mother wasn't just a bad parent, she was a criminal. She hadn't just borrowed money. She had looked a bank teller in the eye and pretended to be me. Or worse, she convinced them she had the right to be me. "The co-applicant is Linda M. Drummond," Sarah said. The air left my lungs. My mother. My own mother. She had walked into a bank, used my social security number, used her own address, and forged my signature to fund a party for her favorite child. "Ma'am," Sarah asked gently, "we will flag this for fraud investigation. You will receive forms to complete within 24 hours. I whispered a thank you and hung up. I sat there in the silence of my apartment, staring at the black screen of my phone. She had stolen my name. She had stolen my credit. She had stolen my trust. Most people would call their mom screaming right now. They would yell, cry, and beg for an explanation. But I knew Linda Drummond. If I yelled, she would hang up. If I cried, she would call me dramatic. I needed to be smarter. I needed to be colder. I remembered something important about Colorado law. It is a one-party consent state. That meant I could record a phone call without telling the other person. I opened the voice recorder app on my phone. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my heartbeat. I needed a confession. I needed her to say it in her own words before she realized the police and the bank were coming for her. I hit the red record button. The timer started ticking. "1. AU." I dialed her number. It rang once. It rang twice. I pictured her sitting in her kitchen, maybe looking at invitations for Ryan's party, completely unaware that her daughter was about to bring the whole house of cards crashing down. On the third ring, the line clicked open. "Hello," she said. Her voice was sharp, annoyed. She had no idea what was coming. I stared at the red timer on my phone screen, counting the seconds. 0:03. In the state of Colorado, the law says only one person needs to know a conversation is being recorded. That person was me. I didn't need her permission to catch her in a lie. I just needed her voice. My thumb hovered over the speaker button as the ringing sound echoed in my empty apartment. I wasn't calling as her daughter anymore. I was calling as a victim building a case file. I needed her to admit she opened those accounts. I needed proof that wasn't just my word against hers. When the line finally clicked open, my stomach did a somersault, but I forced my voice to stay steady and cold as ice. "So you're alive," she snapped. That was her greeting. "No. Hello? No. I'm sorry I sent the police to your house." Just sarcasm and anger. She sounded annoyed that I had the audacity to exist without her permission. In the past, that tone would have made me apologize immediately. I would have scrambled to make her happy. But today, her anger didn't scare me. It just focused me. It was noise. and I had a job to do. "Mom," I said, cutting through her attitude like a knife, "I found 2 credit cards opened under my name. Both of them are using your address. Do you want to explain that to me?" I waited for the denial. I expected her to say, "I don't know what you're talking about," or "maybe you were hacked." But narcissists are arrogant. They don't think they need to hide what they do because they truly believe they own you. And what she said next was so shocking, so completely twisted that I almost forgot to breathe. It proved that in her mind, stealing from me wasn't a crime. It was her right as a mother. She laughed. It was a hollow, practiced sound that I had heard 1,000 times at dinner parties. "Oh, that," she said, dismissing a felony like it was a speck of dust on her coat. "Honey, I was helping you build credit. You should be grateful. You have no history, and since you weren't helping with the money for Ryan's Sweet 16, I figured I'd handle it for you." My jaw dropped. She admitted it. She admitted opening the cards, and then she twisted it to make herself look like a saint. She wasn't stealing. She was helping. She wasn't committing fraud. She was teaching me financial responsibility by drowning me in debt for a party I wasn't invited to. "Stop dramatizing everything," she continued, her voice getting louder. "It is family money, Cheryl. What is yours is ours. That is how this works." There it was. The core of the rot in our family. She truly believed that my bank account was just an extension of her purse. She believed that my autonomy was optional. "No," I said softly, interrupting her rant. "That isn't how it works. What is mine is mine." I took a deep breath, preparing to drop the hammer. "And what is yours is currently under investigation." The silence that followed was heavy. It wasn't the comfortable silence of a pause. It was the stunned, suffocating silence of a bully who just got punched in the nose for the first time. I could hear her sharp inhale on the other end of the line. The air in my apartment felt electric. I knew I had just crossed a bridge and I burned it down behind me. There was no going back to Sunday dinners after this. "What did you say?" she whispered. Her voice had lost all its sharpness. It sounded small and dangerous. "I said I reported it," I replied, leaning back against my kitchen counter. "I called the bank. I reported the identity theft. They have the records, Mom. They know it was opened in Littleton. They know you were the co-applicant." I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just stated the facts. "The fraud department is already looking into the transactions at the DJ agency and the venue." "You wouldn't dare," she hissed. The venom was back in her voice, but this time it was mixed with panic. "You are not going to ruin your brother's birthday over a misunderstanding. You call them back right now and tell them it was a mistake." She was commanding me again. She thought she could just order me to cancel a federal investigation like I was canceling a dinner reservation. She didn't realize that the daughter she was talking to didn't exist anymore. That daughter died the day she sat alone at graduation. "I already did," I said. "I already filed the report. It's out of my hands." I didn't wait for her to explode. I didn't wait for the guilt trip or the screaming or the fake tears. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red "End Call" button. The line went dead. I immediately saved the recording. I typed in the file name with shaking fingers. Boundaries. It was done. I had her confession. I had the proof. I thought that hanging up would make me feel safe. But as I stood there in the morning light, looking at my diploma and my new lock, I realized something terrifying. My mother wasn't the type to give up. I had backed a wild animal into a corner. And she wasn't going to just sit there and let the bank come for her. She was going to fight back. And her next move wouldn't be over the phone. May 17th, 2025. I will never forget that date. Outside, the sun was shining on the floor, catching the edges of the lock I had installed. 2 pieces of proof that I had earned everything on my own, my degree and my safety. For the first time, the silence in my apartment felt powerful. It wasn't the pause before a storm anymore. It was the storm, and I was finally the one holding the thunder. But thunder makes noise, and my parents were about to demand a meeting to make me shut up. My phone buzzed again 10 minutes later. It wasn't a call. It was a text from my dad. "Meet us at the diner in Highlands Ranch. Tonight, 7 p.m. We need to settle this." They wanted a meeting. They wanted to gang up on me in person, probably to bully me into withdrawing the fraud report. They wanted neutral ground. But they didn't know that I wasn't coming to negotiate. I was coming to deliver the final blow, and I was bringing a folder full of evidence that would shut them up forever. I chose a diner in Highlands Ranch for the showdown. It was neutral ground, halfway between their big house in Littleton and my small apartment in the city. It was the kind of place with cracked leather booths and coffee that tasted like burnt water, but it was perfect for what I needed. It was public, it was quiet, and it was impossible to scream in without causing a scene. I got there early, sitting with my back to the wall so I could see the door. My hands were folded on the table to stop them from shaking. I waited and waited. They arrived 15 minutes late. That was their first power move. They wanted me to sweat. They wanted to remind me that my time wasn't valuable to them. But when they finally walked in, the dynamic felt different. Usually I would be checking my watch, terrified I had upset them. Today I just watched them enter like I was a judge waiting for the jury. My mother walked in first, wearing a floral dress and big sunglasses like armor, acting like a celebrity hiding from paparazzi. My father trailed behind her, looking smaller and more tired than I remembered. And then there was Ryan. He followed them, his face buried in his phone, thumbs flying across the screen. The golden child didn't even look up to see his sister. He just slid into the booth, expecting me to be happy he showed up at all. "Cheryl," Mom said sharply, sliding into the seat across from me. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was. She just sighed loudly. "You really made us drive all the way here for dinner?" She picked up a menu, dismissing me instantly. "We aren't eating," I said. My voice surprised me. It wasn't the shaky whisper of the girl who sent $1. It was steady. It was cold. It sounded like the steel lock on my door. "We are talking." The waitress appeared with a pot of coffee, sensed the toxic energy radiating off our table, poured 3 cups in record time, and disappeared. Mom glared at me over her menu. "Well, make it quick. We have final fittings for Ryan's party tonight." I didn't say a word. I just reached into my bag and pulled out a thick brown folder. I slid it across the sticky table until it hit her silverware with a dull thud. She looked at it, then at me. "What is this?" she asked, feigning boredom. "Open it," I said. She flipped it open. Inside were the printouts of the credit report. 2 new accounts, Capital One and Discover, both opened in my name but tied to her address, both maxed out with charges for Ryan's Sweet 16. Her eyes scanned the pages. Her smile barely twitched. She didn't look guilty. She looked annoyed that she had been caught. This is the part where a normal parent apologizes. They cry. They beg for forgiveness. But Linda Drummond is not a normal parent. She looked up at me, closed the folder, and gave a little laugh. What she said next made the blood boil in my veins. She actually tried to spin her felony into a favor. If you think you know how twisted narcissists can be, you have no idea. "Oh, that," she said, waving her hand like she was swatting a fly. "Honey, I did it for you. You need credit history. I was helping you build a score." I stared at her. "Helping?" I repeated softly. "You forged my signature, Mom. You stole my identity." She rolled her eyes. "Don't make this dramatic, Cheryl," she snapped. "It is family. You have always been so ungrateful. Do you think the world doesn't know who paid for your education?" That was the trigger. That was the lie she told everyone. She loved pretending she funded my life, when the truth was I had been funding theirs since I was 16. I laughed. It was a sharp, loud sound that made every head in the diner turn toward our booth. "You mean me?" I asked, my voice rising. "I paid for my education. I paid for it with every double shift I worked. I paid for it with every student loan you told me to take out, while you used my college fund to buy Ryan a car. Ryan groaned and finally looked up from his phone. "Here we go again," he muttered, rolling his eyes. "Can we just go? She's obviously having a meltdown." I turned on him. "That watch you're wearing?" I pointed at his wrist. "You're wearing it on a card opened in my name. Enjoy the spotlight, Ryan, because you stole it." The air at the table turned poisonous. Mom slammed her hand on the table. "Enough!" she hissed. "You do not talk to your brother that way. I didn't steal from you, Cheryl. I borrowed for the family. You are being selfish." But I wasn't done. I had one more card to play, and it wasn't a credit card. It was the truth about the police visit. I leaned in close so only they could hear the venom in my voice. "You used my identity," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was scarier than screaming. "Then you called the police on me because I changed my locks. You tried to paint me as unstable so you could keep control of me. That ends today." My dad finally spoke up. His voice was small, terrified of his wife. "Sweetheart, your mother just got carried away. Let's not blow this up. We can fix it privately." I pushed the folder closer to him. "There is no fixing it privately, Dad. The bank already knows. There is an open investigation." Mom's face went pale. The color drained out of her cheeks like water down a drain. "You did what?" she whispered. "I reported the fraud," I said simply. "The accounts are frozen. The bank has your signature. They have the video footage from the branch. They have your address." The silence that followed was thick enough to taste. Even the hum of the refrigerator in the back seemed to stop. The air itself was listening. She looked at me with pure hatred. "You will regret this," she hissed. "You are destroying this family over a misunderstanding." I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but my heart felt lighter than it had in years. I looked down at them, the mother who stole from me, the father who let it happen, and the brother who didn't care. I realized I wasn't losing a family. I was losing a parasite. "No, Mom," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "You destroyed this family the moment you decided my credit score was worth more to you than my love." I threw a $10 bill on the table for my coffee that I didn't drink. "The investigation is active. You'll be hearing from them soon." I turned around and walked out of the diner before she could answer. I didn't look back. Outside, the air smelled like rain. A storm was coming, and tonight it was going to hit Ryan's party. I got in my car and drove away, leaving them sitting in the wreckage of their own lies. They thought I was bluffing. They had no idea that the bank's legal team was already moving in for the kill. I drove home from the diner with the windows down, letting the cold night air hit my face. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, but for the first time in my life, my chest felt light. It was a strange feeling, almost hollow, like I had scooped out all the heavy guilt and fear that used to live inside me. I had finally said the words I was too scared to say for 10 years. I told my mother no, and I walked away while she was still talking. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror at a red light. I didn't look like the scared girl who worked double shifts at Starbucks anymore. I looked like someone who had survived a fire. But as I pulled into my parking spot, I knew the fire wasn't out yet. In fact, the biggest explosion was about to happen across town. I sat in my car for a long moment, just breathing in the smell of rain and asphalt. I pictured what was happening in Littleton right now. My parents were probably speeding home, trying to put on their happy faces for the guests. Tonight was the big night, the event of the season, Ryan's massive birthday bash at Cherry Creek Events. It was supposed to be a coronation for the golden child, paid for with my stolen credit score. I wasn't invited, obviously, but I didn't need an invitation to know exactly how this night was going to end. I looked at the clock. It was 8:45 p.m. The party was in full swing, and then my phone rang. It wasn't my mother screaming this time. It was an unknown number with a local area code. My stomach did a little flip, but I answered it. "This is Cheryl Drummond," I said, keeping my voice steady. A crisp, professional female voice answered immediately. "Ms. Drummond, this is Lauren Stein. I am a legal representative for Capital One in Colorado." I froze. This was it. The bank wasn't just sending letters anymore, they were calling me on a Friday night. "I am calling to inform you that the bank has escalated your fraud report," she continued, her voice calm but very serious. "Given the high dollar amount and the recent activity, our internal team has decided to take immediate action." I gripped the phone tighter. "What kind of action?" I asked, my throat feeling dry. I expected her to say they were freezing the accounts or sending a letter to my mother. I was not ready for what she said next. It was so bold, so aggressive, that it made my jaw drop. If you think banks just sit around and wait for paperwork, you are wrong. When they lose thousands of dollars, they don't wait. They hunt. "We have coordinated with local law enforcement," Lauren said. "We need to verify the fraudulent transactions that are happening right now. We have officers and a bank representative heading to Cherry Creek events as we speak." My heart hammered against my ribs. "You are sending police to the party?" I whispered. "Yes, ma'am," she replied. "It is standard procedure for active fraud cases involving large venue charges. We need to document and confirm that the cardholder, you, is not present and did not authorize these services." She paused. "You are not required to attend, Ms. Drummond. We just wanted you notified." I thanked her and hung up, my hand trembling. I sat back in my car seat, stunned. They were sending the police to raid my brother's birthday party. I looked out the window at the city lights. I could almost hear the faint music drifting from downtown, miles away. A celebration was happening right now, filled with balloons, cake, and people dancing. And in about 20 minutes, that celebration was going to unravel in front of everyone. I went upstairs to my apartment and sat by the window. I didn't turn on the lights. I just watched the lightning pulse in the clouds above the city. I should have felt guilty. A good daughter would have called her mom right now. A good daughter would have warned them, "Get out, the police are coming." But I didn't pick up the phone. I remembered the empty row at my graduation. I remembered the silence when I walked across the stage alone. They didn't warn me they weren't coming. They just let me stand there and look foolish. Now it was their turn to stand in the spotlight and feel the burn of public shame. 40 minutes passed. The silence in my apartment was thick. I sipped a glass of water, waiting. Then my phone buzzed on the table. It buzzed again and again. It started vibrating so hard it almost fell off the edge. I looked at the screen. It was a text from Ryan. "Are you insane?" Then another one. "The police just showed up." The DJ stopped playing. "Everyone is staring at us." I read the words, feeling a strange detachment. It was like reading a story about someone else. The texts kept coming, faster and more frantic. "Mom is freaking out. They are asking for her ID. They are saying your name, Cheryl. The bank guy is saying your name in front of everyone. What did you do?" I didn't reply. I didn't have to. The truth was already speaking for me, louder than I ever could. I imagined the scene, the music cutting out, the whispers rippling through the crowd, the golden child banner drooping in the silence. Meanwhile, across town, the reality was worse than I imagined. 2 uniformed officers walked into the glowing banquet hall. There were no sirens, just the heavy, quiet authority of the law cutting through the neon haze. A banker in a suit followed them, holding a thick folder full of receipts. They walked right past the dance floor, right past the cake, straight to where my mother was holding court. "Good evening," the officer said, his voice booming in the sudden quiet. "We are here to verify a report of credit card fraud associated with this event." Cameras flashed, phones went up. Half the guests were recording the disaster, capturing the exact moment the perfect family facade crumbled. My mother froze, the color draining from her face until she looked like a ghost. She looked for a way out, but there was nowhere to run. The officers weren't there to chat. They were there to expose a crime. And the name they read from the report made everyone gasp. The music inside the banquet hall was thumping so loud it rattled the windows, a bass-heavy beat designed to drown out reality. But the moment the 2 police officers stepped through the double doors, The atmosphere changed instantly. They didn't run in with guns drawn. They walked in with a slow, terrifying calmness that silenced the room faster than a gunshot. The DJ saw the uniforms and cut the sound immediately. The sudden silence was physical. It hit the crowd like a slap. 1 second, people were dancing and laughing. The next, the only sound was the squeak of police boots on the polished dance floor. A banker in a gray suit followed them, clutching a folder thick with evidence. "Good evening," the lead officer said. His voice wasn't angry, but it carried to the back of the room without a microphone. "We are here to verify a report of credit card fraud associated with this event." The words hung in the air, heavy and ugly. Guests who were holding champagne glasses lowered them. People who were chewing stopped mid-bite. Murmurs started rippling through the crowd like a wave. "Fraud?" someone whispered. "Are they serious?" The officer continued, looking straight at the head table. "The charges for this venue were made using an account under the name Cheryl Drummond." This was the moment that changed everything. The guests weren't just confused anymore, they were pulling out their phones. In 2025, scandal isn't just witnessed, it's recorded. Dozens of screens lit up in the dim room, capturing the scene in high definition. My mother, who was standing near the massive 3-tier birthday cake, froze. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like she was going to faint. She had spent years curating an image of wealth and perfection. Now 50 cameras were live streaming her nightmare. My mother tried to recover. She plastered a shaky smile on her face and stepped forward, her hands trembling as she smoothed her dress. "There must be a mistake, officer," she said, her voice wobbling high and thin. "This is a private family celebration. We paid for everything." She was still lying. Even with the police standing 2 feet away, she couldn't stop the performance. She looked around at her friends, silently begging them to believe her. "It's just a banking error," she insisted, laughing nervously. "You know how computers are." The banker in the gray suit didn't smile. He didn't look at the guests. He stepped forward and opened the thick folder. He read from the paper in a flat, bored voice that made it sound even worse. "Primary applicant, Linda M. Drummond," he read aloud. "Co-signer listed as Cheryl Drummond. Status, unauthorized." He looked up over his glasses. The transaction records indicate misuse of another person's identity to fund these services. The room gasped. It was a collective sound of shock. The lie was dead. The truth was naked in the middle of the dance floor. You could actually hear the moment the crowd turned on her. Someone in the back whispered, loud enough to be heard, "Isn't that her daughter's name?" Another voice replied, "Wait, she stole from her own kid." The shame wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a physical weight in the room. But the most heartbreaking reaction didn't come from the guests. It came from the boy of honor, Ryan. Ryan was standing in the center of the floor, wearing his expensive suit and the new watch I paid for. He looked from the police to our mother, his eyes wide and wet. "Mom?" he whispered. "What did you do?" He wasn't the arrogant brother anymore. He was just a kid realizing his big night was a crime scene. He backed away from her like she was contagious. "You said you handled it," he said, his voice cracking. "You said Dad paid for this." My mother reached out for him, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, but no sound came out. The officer raised a hand to calm the room. "We are not arresting anyone tonight," he announced. "This is currently a documentation visit for the bank's active fraud case. However, we need to take copies of all receipts and verify ID immediately." That was almost worse than handcuffs. Arrests are quick. This was slow. They made her stand there, in front of her church friends and neighbors, and hand over her license. They made her sign papers admitting she was the one who signed the checks. It was a slow-motion dismantling of her dignity. The party died instantly. There was no way to bring the vibe back after the police accused the hostess of identity theft. The DJ silently started unplugging his speakers, coiling up wires with his head down. The banner that read, "Ryan Sweet 16, Born to Shine," drooped sadly under the humid air. The room emptied in slow waves. People didn't even say goodbye. They just grabbed their coats and walked out whispering to each other, casting pitying looks at my father, who sat in a chair with his head in his hands. By the time my mother finally stepped outside, the parking lot was almost empty. Rain had begun to fall, a soft, relentless drizzle that soaked her fancy dress. She stood alone on the curb, watching the last taillights fade away. Inside my apartment, miles away, I watched the lightning flash and felt a strange sense of closure. I didn't smile, I didn't cheer, I just let the quiet wrap around me. The storm had finally broken. But while the party was over, the real cost was just beginning. Because when the sun rose tomorrow, everyone in town would know exactly who Linda Drummond really was. And she still had a debt to pay that money couldn't fix. 3 days after the police raided the party, the storm outside had finally passed, but the wreckage in my family was still there. I was sitting at my kitchen table when the email notification pinged on my laptop. It was from Capital One. My heart gave a little jump, but it wasn't fear this time. It was anticipation. I clicked it open. The subject line read, "Fraud investigation resolved." I read the message 3 times just to make sure it was real. It was short, cold, and professional. It said that the primary applicant, Linda M. Drummond, had acknowledged unauthorized use of the account. She had agreed to repay the full amount to avoid further legal action. That single email was worth more to me than $1 million. It was proof. For my whole life, my mother had twisted reality. She made me feel crazy for having feelings. She made me feel selfish for wanting to keep my own money. But this email? This was black and white. It was the truth. Finally written down on paper where she couldn't erase it. There was no apology included. There was no, "I'm sorry, Cheryl." Just a legal admission of guilt. And honestly, that was better than an apology. An apology is just words. This was justice. Word traveled fast in a suburb like Littleton. In our town, gossip moves faster than the speed of light, especially when it involves the police and a ruined party. People started whispering in the grocery store aisles. They gossiped at church. "Did you hear about the Drummonds?" they would say. Something about credit card fraud at the Sweet 16. Someone had posted a video of the police walking into the venue. It was only 30 seconds of chaos, but it hit 500,000 views online before Ryan managed to lock his social media accounts. The perfect image my mother had spent 20 years building was destroyed in one night. My father wasn't safe from the fallout either. He was quietly reprimanded at his job because he had allowed some of their personal financial mail and the messy statements to be sent to his company address. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty about their bad luck. I didn't try to fix it. I didn't reply to their frantic text messages or their voicemails begging me to clear things up. I was done explaining things that should have been obvious. They broke the law. They got caught. It wasn't my job to cushion their fall anymore. This is the part of the story where you have to do the boring work to make sure you stay free. I spent the next week filling out forms for the Federal Trade Commission. I froze my credit at all 3 bureaus so tight that nobody could open an account in my name unless they had my fingerprint and a blood sample. I closed every single bank account that my mother had ever touched or even looked at. It felt like I was scrubbing them off my skin. With every account I closed, I felt a little lighter. I was reclaiming my name. When the final confirmation letter arrived in the mail, stating that my record was clean and the fraud was resolved, I didn't file it away in a drawer. I did something symbolic. I took a pushpin and pinned the letter to my living room wall. Right next to it, I hung my framed diploma, the one I earned while working at Starbucks. And next to that, I pinned the crumpled receipt from the locksmith who changed my locks that first night. 3 pieces of paper, side by side. They looked like art to me. I stood back and looked at my wall of victory. Those 3 papers told the whole story of my survival. The diploma was proof of my effort. The locksmith receipt was proof of my protection. And the fraud letter was proof of my freedom. Together, they were a reminder that I wasn't just a daughter or a sister or an ATM machine. I was a person who fought for herself and won. If I ever felt weak again, all I had to do was look at that wall and remember who I was. That night, I brewed a cup of tea and opened the window. The cool night air of Denver spilled into my apartment. The city hummed below me, alive and busy and completely uncaring about my family drama. For the first time in years, the silence in my apartment didn't hurt. It didn't feel lonely. It healed. I took a sip of tea and realized that I didn't miss them. I missed the idea of them, the idea of a loving family, but I didn't miss the manipulation. I was alone, yes, but I was safe, and safety felt a lot like happiness. 6 months later, autumn settled over the city. The trees on the streets turned gold with fallen leaves, and the air got crisp and forgiving. I started a new job at a place called Nova Data Labs. I was surrounded by people who respected me for the code I wrote and the problems I solved, not for what I could give them. I made new friends who didn't know about the Sweet 16 disaster. I was building a life that was 100% mine. My parents were just a memory now, a lesson I had learned the hard way. If you are watching this and you feel like you are drowning in family expectations, listen to me. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to change the locks. You are allowed to choose yourself. It might be scary at first. The silence might feel loud, but eventually, that silence turns into peace. Hit that subscribe button right now if you believe that everyone deserves to know the truth, no matter how inconvenient it is for the people hiding it. Only people like my parents, who bury their past to chase status, would let something like this go on. Don't be like them. Subscribe if you stand for fairness. And if you think children deserve to have parents who protect them instead of steal from them, hit the like button and comment, "I believe in second chances" below, but only for the victims, not the villains. Don't side with people who hide the truth. I'm Cheryl Drummond, and I finally hold the key to my own life.